Oh, wow.
pretty long relationship with pretty long relationship with Mass Bird Club. I've been a subscriber to the Mass Leps for at least 20 years, and I've come down to Massachusetts occasionally for things like frosted elfins and so forth. Um, and also for the Maine Butterfly Survey, we've had contributions from a number of Mass Butterfly Club members. And I see that Richard Hildreth is zooming on today, and he was one of our top collectors, particularly the down eastern Maine. So it's nice to have Richard here. And I can't see who is in the audience exactly, but perhaps Wendy Howes is there. I know she's very active in the Mass Bird Club, but she used to live in Maine, and we knew each other then. So if she's there, it's nice to see you. Nice to at least know you're around, Wendy. And I've been to a number of NABA meetings, and so I've met some of you at the NABA meetings in different parts of the world. But let's talk a little bit about how the Maine Butterfly Survey came to be. We've been doing a number of these talks at libraries and Audubon societies and general places like that, where the audience is a little more general in their knowledge. So I've changed the talk today, and I'm going to dispense with a lot of the introductory material about what a butterfly is and why it's not a moth and so forth, because I know that you folks are keenly aware of all those details. So we'll focus particularly on information in the book that came out. But Maine has a strong history of atlasing. We did the first bird atlas, 1973 to 1977 to 1982. In retrospect, it was pretty primitive, but at least it was one of the first ones done in the eastern part of the United States. But after that, we've had citizen science projects that have produced atlases of the amphibians and reptiles of Maine, of the odonates of Maine, and having done those, the Ode survey was finished in 1999, and so we were looking for something else to do. And at that time, I had become much more interested in butterflies. I'd in fact taught classes in butterflies at Maine Audubon. And Ron Butler, who is one of my colleagues, was very involved with odonates, and he was keen to do something else as well with a Maine Atlas project. And Philip de Maynadier, who I think has talked to you years ago at the beginning of this project, was heading up these state projects. And so ultimately, it was decided that we needed to do a Maine butterfly survey. So it began in 2003. 2003 and 2005 was sort of the silent era. What we were doing then was going to museums and people's private collections and figuring out trying to get all the records we had up to that point. And then we unleashed volunteers to go out in the wilds and collect butterflies, or at least photograph butterflies. It was a voucher-based system, so we required either a photograph or a specimen. And the level at which we did the survey was pretty remarkable, that a lot of people use lat long blocks. But what we decided to do was to use the township level. And it turns out in Maine, there are a heck of a lot of townships. There are 911 to be precise. So our goal was to try to get at least some sampling done in each of those 911 townships. So it involved lots of volunteers, and over 400 people contributed information to them. So ultimately, we closed down shop in 2017 officially, but we kept collecting records that were notable and noting those. And finally, we got a contract with Cornell University Press, and finally got around to getting a final copy done, and off it went. And here you see it. I know you have a copy there in the room. But you can see that there are 5 authors. Philip de Maynadier, I've mentioned, is at the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and he headed up the project and all the funding and so forth, did all the most of the species accounts. Ron Butler, my colleague from UMaine Farmington, like me, has dual interest in birds and in insects, and he did all of the maps, all the ArcGIS maps, as well as contributing lots of other portions. And then I contributed the phenograms, and I did the statistical analysis that we did. And we needed someone to confirm our records. And so John Calhoun, who spends his summers in Maine, uh, was our taxonomic authority. He was a president of the Lepidopterist Society, and he's published books on the butterflies of Ohio and butterflies of Florida. So he's well adapted. And when we were about to think about closing down shop and doing our project, we got contacted by John Klimko, who is based in New Brunswick, and they were just concluding the Maritime Butterfly Atlas project. And so we talked about the wisdom of combining our data and writing a single book about the so-called Acadia region. So here we see the butterflies of Maine and the Canadian Maritime provinces. John was pretty much a one-man show. He did all the fundraising, all the confirmation, all the volunteer organization, but they did a great job as well. So this is where we are, and what I want to do is talk a little bit about the effort to start with that we put into this project. So here's a map that shows records prior to 1995, and you can see the density of the green indicates how many records there are. You can see there are a heck of a lot of townships in Maine, and they used a geographic blocks in Canada, so a slightly different system there, but anyway, fairly small blocks, but not so many there when you compare it to what we did during the project. And so look at all those dark green colors. They all represent records that were collected from 1996 onward. And if you put the two together, you can see it's pretty striking that we really have done a whole lot of filling in the blanks, if you will, of Maine butterflies. And you can see there, surprisingly, there aren't that many blank blocks. And these are all up in the industrial forest, where to get to them, you have to go down logging roads, and it's not easy to get to them. But some areas, of course, are heavily sampled because of population density being very high there. Here's another way of looking at the data. Here are the number of records that we have for the Maine and the Maritimes over time. And boy, just an exponential increase there for both the Maine and the Maritimes. And this is the number of species that have been known since the beginning of our records. So for 1860 for Maine and 1885 or so for the Maritimes. And you can see as time goes on, we add more and more and more species, but this curve still hasn't flattened out. So we know that there are more species to be found, but at least we feel like we've got a pretty good handle on the butterfly fauna of both Maine and the Maritimes. So a little bit of general information, and this is only a small subset of what I would do to a general audience, but we know that within the Lepidoptera, the moths and butterflies, there are about 165,000 named species, and there are certainly many more undescribed micro moths, but 90% or more are in fact moths, so that only leaves about 10% being butterflies. There's 7 families of butterflies, and of course we have 5 in our particular region. And this is just looking at where butterflies are found in terms of diversity throughout the world. And not surprisingly, the tropics are the place to go if you want to see lots and lots of butterflies. There are about 19,000 worldwide, only 575 in the lower 48 of the United States. But you go to areas like Amazonia and parts of Africa, and you're well up in the thousands without any problem at all. So a little bit about their fossil history. It's poor, as you might imagine, for organisms that are pretty soft-bodied. The oldest moth that we have was in fossils taken, a fossil stratum taken, laid down 300 million years ago. The oldest butterfly is about 98 million years ago. That's the time of the dinosaurs. And here's just an evolutionary tree of them. I don't expect you to take a look at these things particularly, but one thing I do want to mention is that butterflies are a homogeneous group. In terms of evolutionary biology, we'd say that they are a monophyletic group. They can all be defined by the fact that they have clubbed antennae. But we divide the Lepidoptera up into moths and butterflies, but we don't have any way to describe what a moth is. A moth is all Lepidoptera except the butterflies, and that doesn't really work for an evolutionary biologist. So we need to come up with a better scheme to do that. But butterflies are a nice single unit. Moths are messy. Biggest butterflies are the bird wings, up to 12 inches across, amazing. And the smallest one that I'm aware of is pygmy blue. So that's about a centimeter, is about 3/8 of an inch. So tiny little guy for sure. Okay, so let's just briefly review the life history of butterflies and a few comments along the way. But sometimes eggs are laid in a solitary fashion, and they often are highly beautiful. That looks like a little puffball, doesn't it? Sometimes they're laid in groups, so it depends on the particular species. But of course, the eggs hatch out as the larval form, which is the caterpillar. And what we'll do is take a look at several features of caterpillars. One is that they are feeding machines. And all of you that have kept butterflies in protection as to raise them up, or larvae caterpillars, know how much they can eat. And massive jaws. So 3 pairs of legs, and then also those prolegs. But what I want to mention about these caterpillars is that they are engaged in an evolutionary arms race with their food, because they are herbivores, so they're eating leaves, but the leaves have no interest in being eaten. And these massive jaws of a caterpillar mean that even the toughest leaf can be eaten by a caterpillar. So what's the plant going to do? Resort to, like Monsanto, better living through chemistry. So what happens is that plants develop what are called allelochemicals, poisons essentially, that keep herbivores from eating them. Well, the war goes on because what happens is the caterpillars derive abilities to break down those particular allelochemicals. But the problem is that every different species of plant has a different set of chemical protection. So what works on this particular plant may not work on the other one. So what it means is that caterpillars generally, as you all know, are usually found on a single host plant. So the eggs must be laid on that host plant to give the caterpillar a chance. And then what happens, of course, is that we go through the process of pupation. And here's starting to hang upside down on the underside of a leaf, uh, accomplished by these. This is a scanning electron micrograph that shows the hooks or the cremaster of a particular pupa or larva. And then this is the cremaster of a different species. And so they're going to be very still for a long time. And basically, sometimes they have little seat belts to hang on with. That's pretty fun. And so typical a pupa hanging upside down there. And of course, what goes on here is one of the most remarkable things in all of biology, which is what insect developmental biologists call cataclysmic metamorphosis. Essentially, all of the organs of the body of the caterpillar break down and reorganize. And so we convert from a herbivore with massive jaws to a soda drinker. So, and this soda drinking, of course, is accomplished by this long proboscis, which actually is 2 half tubes that are stuck together. But these are used to sip nectar. So the adults are sipping nectar, and that is typical sulfur there, doing what it does best. And here's an important point, that adults don't really care what nectar they eat, they imbibe, that they can have lots of different host plants for them as far as their feeding is concerned. But it's very important that the caterpillars get associated with their particular host plant. Otherwise, they will starve. So nectaring is a way that most butterflies are going to, adult butterflies are going to acquire energy. And here's a milkweed plant. And of course, this female here is sizing it up because she knows that this is a good place to lay her eggs. And then once the eggs are laid and the caterpillar hatches out, then this caterpillar is in hog heaven. It's on the Asclepias, the milkweeds, that it can tolerate the poisons that it makes. In fact, uses it for its own defense, doesn't it? Some species are dependent on a single species throughout their life cycle. So a couple of examples of bog copper and bog fritillary, that they are dependent on small leaf cranberry, both for the larval food, and it's also the cranberry flowers that are favored by the adults. So the entire life cycle can take place in a very small area in a northern bog. And of course, there are some butterflies that eat things other than nectar, so sap and rotting fruit. So a question mark here, Viceroy. I'm being obscured by the list of panelists here, so I'm not seeing the right side of my things, but I think that's a common wood nymph, right? And of course, red admiral and harvester. And then I'll talk a little bit about hibernation. That there are some butterflies that do hibernate, and you're well aware of these. Most of all the commas do that, and the morning cloaks can show up very early in the spring on a nice warm day. Milbert's tortoiseshell, of course, Compton's tortoiseshell, and the ladies, American lady and painted lady, and of course, the monarch. So if we look at overwintering strategies, they vary highly among our different butterflies. And by the way, we have 122 species of butterflies in Maine. So some of them, and again, I'm not worried about you trying to remember any of this, but there's some butterflies that overwinter as eggs, some coppers, the European skipper, some as caterpillars, most fritillaries, white admiral, viceroy, most satyrs, some as pupae, swallowtails, sulfurs, hair streaks, and then the adults, we already saw those. And there's some that just get the heck out of Dodge. So they overwinter as adults, but not necessarily here in the state of Maine or in New England where they happen to be. Okay, so here is the most important part of our field guide. So each species, each of the 120, well, in the book, there are 120 species in the book, but each of them has a double page facing page that gives a lot of information. One is if there are subspecies, we talk about that. We give some distinguishing characteristics, not enough to really nail down identification of some of the really tricky things, but it's at least gets you a good go toward identifying a particular butterfly. And then similar species, that's helpful to try to distinguish related species or similar species. Our status, distribution in Maine, the bog elfin here is uncommon to rare. The status and distribution in the Maritimes, same sort of thing. The habitat where you would find it, and of course, bog elfin you might expect to find in a spruce bog, a black spruce bog. And then we have other information on the host plants, the larval host plants, and the plants that adults use for nectaring, and then other comments just in general. So, and then finally, we have something on threats. So, is this of a conservation concern? And you can see that we have these phenograms that show the distribution at 6-day intervals for both the Maritimes and for Maine. And here are the maps that that Ron Butler produced showing the distribution of the bog elfin in Maine and Maritimes. So you'll also notice that there is a color along the margin here. And so there are 5 different colors pertaining to the 5 different families that we have in Maine. So by looking at the margin of your book, you can quickly find the swallowtails, or you can find the sulfurs and get to where you want to be. So let's just go through and just take a look at the 5 families, and we'll start with the skippers. So we know that there are 2 flavors, the spread wings and the grass skippers. But all skippers, oh, this is not showing. This photograph, by the way, is taken by Eric Nielsen. This is a southern cloudy wing, and it got its top whapped off. Let's try another one here. Maybe you're seeing more of the screen than I am here, but we know that skippers have a all butterflies have a club at the tip of their antennae, right? But in the case of the skippers, they have a little curve. They're a very nice little shepherd's hook. So that's an easy to identify skippers just by looking for that hook. So you want to find out which of the 5 families you want to go to. First, look for the hook. Then, if your butterfly is mostly all white or all yellow, you've got a sulfur. So here's a cabbage white, and there's a clouded sulfur, 2 of our most common butterflies. it may have long tails, like this black swallowtail. So that easily gets you to the swallowtail family. And then that just leaves us two families, both of which can be fairly colorful. One are the gossamer wings, the lycaenids, and you can easily tell these apart by just counting legs. So the lycaenids have, this is a copper that you don't see the legs, but it has 6 legs like any self-respecting insect should have. But, oh yeah, there we go. So the brown elfin has 3 legs on the right side and the 3 on the other side as well. But if we take a look at the other family, the nymphalids or the brushfoots, you look and you can only see 4 walking legs. And of course, we know that the anterior most legs are present. They're just folded up against the body and they are taste receptors. But walking around, you just see 4 legs. So that's a nice, great spangled fritillary that's posing for us very nicely there. Well, it looks like it might be on some dung. So that's something that fritillaries will take advantage of. So the most common butterflies in Maine. Tom, is there a way to allow people to talk?
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. So what I want to know is, what do you think are the most common butterflies in Maine?
Cabbage white.
What,
Cabbage white was one.
okay, that's a good one. Yep.
Tiny swallowtail.
Okay.
Tom.
The Atlantic puffin.
Oh, now we're talking. Okay. All right. Well, the time has come for the reveal. So here are the most common butterflies in Maine as judged by our Maine butterfly survey. So Tom, you can mute the system now. But ringlets that's the most common, and you can see that that there are 2 solid generations per year and evidence of a third later in the fall. Clouded sulfur, of course. Northern crescent. And crescent identification, as you know, is damnably hard, but in Maine, pearl crescent is only found in mostly the southern extremes of the state. But even so, they are often difficult to tell apart. But anytime you're in the northern half of Maine, you see a crescent, you can identify pretty reliably as a northern crescent. Cabbage white, so someone guessed that is a very common one. Of course, that's introduced. Northern azure, and we acknowledge that azure systematics is very complicated, that someone needs to do the Celestrina species, but we don't recognize cherry gall azure as a good species. We just lump them in together with the northern azure, but they are pretty common, as you can see, in spring. And then Canadian tiger, great spangle frit. And the white admiral, which is the official mascot of the Maine butterfly survey. So we have white admirals. We also get some of the intergrades, the Proserpina intergrades in Maine, but we don't get the red spotted purple, or whatever the common name of that is. And then American ladies. Okay, so what have we added to the species of Maine since 2003? What had not been reported earlier and that we have found during the survey? Well, giant swallowtail. And this photograph was taken by Frank Modell. And for any of you that have seen giant swallowtail, you know this is a remarkable photograph because giant swallowtails are so frenetic, they never stop wagging their wings. So to get the one with the wing still like this is a remarkable photograph. But we have a number of giant swallowtail records from around the state, usually associated with gardens with particular species of plants. And then short-tailed swallowtail, which is found in New Brunswick and Quebec, and in Nova Scotia as well, I do believe. But those of us in the coordinators have been sort of competing to see who could find the short-tailed swallowtail in Maine. And Philip de Maitnagier and his son went up to extreme northern Maine, and they were looking under the leaves of the host plant that was up there. And they just started, and his son found a nest of a short-tailed swallowtail pupa. And Philip was delighted and also maddened by the fact that his son found the first record. But they spent 3 days up there, and that was the only one they ever found. So they did raise it to adulthood, and so we do have a record of short-tailed swallowtail for Maine. And then White-M's hair streak, there are 5 records now. They're all from Kittery area down here, except for one from up around Maine Audubon and in Falmouth, but beautiful hair streak. And then this is the frigafrittillary, which is a boreal species found in Quebec and all the way over to Alaska, but pretty common in Michigan and in Wisconsin too, in the northern parts of that state. But there's only a single bog where it's been found, and it's just nearly impossible to get in there into the bog. It takes an all-day effort. So I think there's 7 of us that have seen frigafritillaries in Maine at this point, but this is the single bog up here is the only place that it's known. But beautiful little one of the lesser fritillaries. And then the skippers are where we're going. Here's a nice little curvature on the skipper, but long-tail skipper. We have records from Mount Desert Island, of all places. And the wild indigo dusky wing is starting to become more common. And of course, you folks are well aware of wild indigo dusky wing because you have lots of them down in Massachusetts. And of course, they love the wild indigo, which does not grow in Maine. It doesn't, at least at this point, it's not able to tolerate our Maine winters. But we know that wild indigo dusky wings have a secondary host plant that they can use, which is this crown vetch, again, a member of the legume family, and it's planted by the Department of Transportation to prevent erosion along roadsides. And so if we take a look at the map again here, you'll notice that there are a lot in the south here, which you would expect, but you'll notice that this little arc of distribution is here. And you know what this is? This is Interstate 95. So there it goes up into Bangor. So that's following the crown vetch. And then black dash. This was John Calhoun found the first black dash in extreme southern Maine down here in Elliott, but there have been other records as well. And the same thing is true for mulberry wing. So again, extreme southern Maine. And oddly enough, European skipper had not been known in Maine until we started. These first showed up in North America in, let's see, was it 1910 or something like that in Ontario, and they sort of spread, but it took them a while to get there. But anyway, it's a very common skipper now in Maine and in the Maritimes. The dusted skipper just pushed up north into Maine as well. And this is this is a crazy record. We've been looking for fiery skipper in Maine for years, figuring. I mean, as you know, they've been pushing northward, and there are a number of records for New Hampshire, but we still haven't found one in southern Maine yet. But Ron Butler was up here sampling. This is the same township where the frigafrittillary is found, where this extreme boreal species was found. And he was out sampling in a field, and he found this fiery skipper. So that's for the first record, that's pretty remarkable. It just shows how mobile butterflies can be. So we expect to find more fireys down in southern Maine as time goes on. And then Acola, we've had a couple of records along the coast. And we have in our book species that we expect to find in Maine but haven't found yet. And one of them was Horace's dusky wing. And so here's a nice I forgot who took this photo. If it may be Michael Newton, I'm not sure. But anyway, it's a very nice photograph of Horace's dusky wing. And so that was in the book when it went to press. And then what happens this summer? A visitor from from Baltimore is up in Maine, and he photographs this dusky wing, and we thought, oh, he's found it. So he found the first Horace's dusky wing while the book was in press. So it's outdated already. But the interesting thing is that it was found up here around Bridgeton, which is well north of the border. So again, it's one of these species that it's probably more widely distributed than we know, than we were able to find. But anyway, you know, you can easily mistake it for at a distance for a wild indigo or some other spread-wing skipper. But he photographed it and was delighted. And then we had another species, and I know this is Michael Newton's picture. We had another species in the book that we thought might be occurring in Maine in the future, and that's the Zabulon skipper. And John Calhoun and I have been independently going down to southern Maine, Kittery area, looking for these, as well as sachem and who knows what else coming up. And I went down in, I think it was early September. I can't remember. We'll see in a second. I went down and I was walking around, and all of a sudden, two male Zabulons are flying around right in front of my nose, harassing each other. But they took off quickly before I could get a photo. And then I walked around a little more, and there was another male, and it flew off and went into the thick brush, thick grass, and couldn't find it. So I spent 4.5 hours traipsing through the area there, and finally I found a very cooperative female. So we have the first record for Zabulon skipper now in Maine as well. So Zabulon skipper and Horace's skipper are now part of the Maine butterfly fauna, but they are not in the book, at least as confirmed species. Okay. So now the sad news: species that have been lost from the Maine butterfly list. Early hairstreak. And I must say that I always was reading about your NBC trips to Mount Greylock to see the early hairstreak, and usually they were successful. And I think, oh, I got to do that someday. But we tried very hard to find early hairstreak. We knew it historically, so you can see all these historic records. But we spent lots and lots of time looking for them in beech forest in the spring, but no luck. So they seemed to be extirpated from Maine. But just tantalizingly, right across the border in New Brunswick, there are some modern records. So that's frustrating to us in a big way. But anyway, we still haven't been able to confirm the early hairstreak. And then regal fritillary. Now, regal fritillary was never really very common in Maine, and we got those 3 records here. But we know this species is doing very poorly population-wide. And of course, the reason is that it depends on tall grass prairies, which are becoming less and less common. And here's just a couple of, this is sort of what the population looked like about 100 years ago. So you can see that there were individuals well into the east. And now this is what the population is like. And this is actually sort of an annoying map, because what it shows is that there are regal fritillaries in Pennsylvania and in Virginia, but there's a single site in each of these states where the regal fritillary is. So they're just hanging on. So most of the regal fritillaries that are still existing are in the remaining prairies from Indiana on westward. So let's just take a look at an overview of, if you wanted to see the most species in Maine and the Maritimes, where would you go? Well, not surprisingly, you would go to the southern part of Maine. That the highest diversity here. Can find 94 of the 120 or 22 species now can be found here. That as you go up in here, these are higher mountains, and so these are Piedmont areas, so you can find some higher altitude species as well as some that are in the lowlands. And then these are areas that are mountainous. So you see a drop off in the number of species that you can see there. And for the Maritimes, the pattern is somewhat similar. The central areas have the highest diversity. Cape Breton Island up in the far right of Nova Scotia is fairly species poor. And then if we look at different kinds of subregions, so these are all defined by I don't know if you can read what's there, but it doesn't really matter. But they're just different kinds of habitats. So pine forest or southern coastal areas, spruce fir highlands here, and then a mix of deciduous and coniferous forest in this area. And when you get a diversity of trees and a diversity of shrubs and a diversity of forbs, you get more diversity. So this area in here has 106 species. It's a large area, so you're going to find more species by sampling a large area, but that's the most speciose area. And of course, the ones that are very poor are places like Cape Breton Island, and others like that. Okay. So we're looking at species that are of concern. So for Maine, we have 24 species that are state listed. So 5 of them are endangered, 3 are threatened, and 13 are of special concern. So we're keeping an eye on them. They haven't been put on the official threatened or endangered list. And then this is some other, I've forgotten what the SGCN stands for, but some sort of network that also sounds the alarm about species that might be hurting. So, but you can see that most of the species that are in trouble are in the southern part, which is in part because of development and the huge number of population that's in the southern third of Maine. And one of the most endangered is this one here, the Katahdin Arctic. We have 2 Arctics in the state. We have the Jutta Arctic, which is pretty widespread in bogs, but we have the Katahdin Arctic. And the reason that it's endangered is it's found in one place. If any of you have ever hiked Mount Katahdin, the highest mountain in the state of Maine, you'll know that up on top there's a flat area called the Tablelands that may be, I don't know, maybe 50 acres in size, something like that. But that's it. That's the habitat for the Katahdin Arctic. So you can see that would be a real concern about whether or not they are going to be able to make it or not. So here are types of habitat that species of concern occupy. So I suspect it's the same case down in southern New England too, but grasslands and shrublands are doing very poorly. For instance, and just to go to birds for a little bit, that grasshopper sparrows, vesper sparrows, meadowlarks are doing very poorly in Maine because we have very little xeric grassland left. Riparian and wet meadow species there are in trouble too. Peatlands, so bogs, and then the alpine tundra. Of course, we know where that one is. That's the Arctic, the Katahdin Arctic there. But anyway, we have species that are in trouble in lots of different habitats. So it's something that we need to keep an eye out on and protect those particular areas that are in short supply. The pitch pine scrub oak barren is very productive area for butterflies, but many of them are rare, and it's a restricted distribution in extreme southern Maine. It's actually, I don't think, a whole lot different than the habitat you would find, say, in South Shore, Massachusetts, but doesn't get up very far into Maine. And then here are some of the problems that we see, the threats, conservation threats. Development, of course, pesticides, ecological succession. What's happening now is that we have more forest in Maine than we've had in 100 years. So lots of farms are reverting to forest. So other concerns, oil pollution, of course, peat mining, not that big a deal in Maine, but in places. Tundra trampling, again, be up on Mount Katahdin and walking around on the tundra, which is illegal to get off the path. But anyway, now the last, how are we doing here? I will try to wrap this up pretty quickly so we'll have some time for questions. But what we of course know is that our world is warming, and one would expect to see species moving northward, and that's clearly the case. But we also would expect species that are here to alter their phenology a bit. We might expect species to, if they are overwintering as a pupa, to emerge earlier. On the other hand, we might see species delaying a little bit longer. So here are some data for the northern pearlii. And what I did was just to take the median date, observation date for all of this is the Maine on the one side, Maritime's on the other. What I did was to say, okay, what was the median date in 1900, the median date in 1950, and so forth. And you can see that there's this downward moving arrow. So it tells us, whoa, come back. So what it tells us is that we are getting earlier emergence of these pearly in both Maine and the Maritimes. But we also are seeing that they are spending longer on the wing too. They're living longer lives, and there's admittedly a lot of variation there, but statistically these are in fact significant trends. So what we know is that there are several, not all species are showing these patterns, but some are. And silvery blue, the northern pearly and European skipper are all emerging earlier than they were 50, 100 years ago. And species that are lingering later, dun skipper, Canadian tiger swallowtail, and the great spangled frit, and others that are lingering later, Atlantis frit, pearly again, and the common wooden nymph. Okay, so I think that's the last that. So what I've tried to do is to give you a little bit of flavor of the different chapters that we have in the book. So again, the meat of the book, I think 270 pages of the 400 are the species accounts, but we have chapters on the history of Lepidoptera study in Maine and the Maritimes, and we have conservation chapters, we have methodology chapters, and we have a chapter on ecology for global warming and things like that. But sorry, I'm not there to actually sell you a book directly, but you can get the books even now from Cornell University Press, and they're pretty fast. People are ordering them and getting them in 2 or 3 days. So there are a couple ways to get there. One is you can just Google Cornell University Press, and then once you get there, you can search for butterflies, and our book will come up, and you can put it in your cart. And once you get in the cart, you put in all your information, and there's a box that asks for a discount code, and this is the magic phrase O9B card, all capitals. So you can get that by just Googling Cornell University Press. But what I also do a blog on birds in Maine, and what I did recently was to put up a blog post that showed how to do this directly. So there's a link that will take you right to the box, and then all you got to do is to add O9B card, and you will get your book ordered. So if you want to get to, I didn't give you the address because it's sort of sloppy or sort of complicated, but if you just Google these 3 words, Maine birds Wilson, the first thing that pops up will be my blog, and the most recent post is the one that will be the one that has the information on the ordering the butterfly book with the 30% discount. The list price, by the way, is $34.95, so 30% will save you $10 and 40 cents or so, something like that. Anyway, that's that's what I had planned to talk to you about, and so we should have some time for questions if you'd like, and I appreciate your attention. Oh, there we go, stop share. Okay. Okay. Can folks hear me?
Could you hear that question?
Yeah. I did not get a question.
All right, try it again.
All right, how about now? Can you hear me, Dr. Wilson?
Say again.
Can you hear me now?
I got you now. Yeah.
All right, so when you talk about the most abundant butterflies, the most common butterflies in Maine, is that
Yeah.
based on effort? Is it based on population density? Is there any kind of limitations on the techniques you guys use to cover this little state of Maine, which is bigger than the rest?
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, it's simply based on the number of records. So it's the species for which we have the most records. So yeah, we as you know, when anytime you're involving citizen scientists, you want to try to make things as easy as possible. So we didn't want to try to impose any sort of measure of effort. But you're right. So
Connection a little better, so.
I'm sorry.
Heard that part, that's your.
Our internet connection is a little wavering, so
Okay.
all Tom heard was that he was right.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Just in case anyone didn't hear.
Anybody
So
else?
what I was saying is that it's just based on the number of records, and so part of that is we don't have an effort. We weren't doing any sort of quantitative things. So for instance, one could go out and collect or photograph a common ringlet, and there could be 1,000 in the field, but that gets just qualified as one record. So we're just looking at the number of records.
Okay.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I can.
So I think that those most common species were just in Maine. Is that right? Or was that for the Maritimes also?
Which I got the first part of the question. I mean the second, but not the first part. The records.
Was the list of most common butterflies just for the state of Maine?
That was just for Maine. Yeah, that was just.
So do you have any idea what the most common ones were for the Maritimes?
They were similar. Yeah, I don't have it all. I don't have it at my hand. Great Spangled Fritillary was more common. Yeah, I don't remember the rest.
You know, is that
There was a large amount of overlap, so they were just mostly trading positions.
it's in the book though, that information?
That would not. Yeah, that would. Yeah, to get that you'd have to email me. I could do a quick search for you, but the raw data would be. But we didn't include. I don't think we included it in the book. The doggone. There's so many. We went through so many different iterations, and stuff got cut out all the time. So I know at one point I had done that, and it may be here. So. Oh, I just found. I think we may have it. Okay, so. No, the thing that I have is the least common species, but not, the most common ones that got cut out. Apparently so. Yeah.
Okay, we have a couple questions online.
Okay.
One is about European skippers. Are they still very common in Maine? They used to be abundant in mass, but are no longer abundant. So what is the answer on the abundance of European skippers in Maine today?
They're still pretty abundant. Again, we don't have the real quantitative data, but the eyeball tells me that 10, 15 years ago, they were more common than they are now, but you're not going to miss them. They're still pretty common. They will often be the most common thing you see at midsummer.
Yeah, and we have a correction from, brought to us by Frank Modell. He says the better living through chemistry was a DuPont slogan, not Monsanto. So just as long as we have that straightened out.
I did not know that. Okay. My apologies to Monsanto.
All right. With that said, I think we're pretty well set.
Well,
Another question?
Clayton's comma, did you? Dorcas comma. And decided, or, I mean, how did they?
That fallout.
Right.
The plate toppers of Dorcas or
The Dorcas and Clayton's, species.
Yeah, so we gave both names.
Not sorted.
Yeah.
So I guess related to that question, did you use the NAVA list for common names all the time? Well, I guess not if you use Northern Azure.
That wasn't my job, and I think John Calhoun did that. And I think they were using I've forgotten the fellow's name, but the guy who does the online catalog of North American butterflies in Washington State.
Yeah. Pile?
No, it wasn't Pyle.
The Pelham list, Pelham, is that right?
Oh, yeah, that's the one. That's it. Exactly. Yeah, John Pelham. Yeah. The one thing, and I don't know that we I don't know if this is NAVA approved or if it's Pelham approved, but we chose to use Sassacus skipper instead of Indian skipper.
Yeah. All right. Okay, I think we're there. Thank you very much, Doctor.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think we're good.
All right, great.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Just do